Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. As we approach Dussehra and Diwali, is the government right in claiming that they can see green shoots on the economic horizon? Or is the government ignoring serious problems that need to be immediately tackled? That's the key issue I should raise today with one of India's most illustrious former chief economic advisors, a former chief economist at the World Bank, and now a highly regarded professor of economics at Cornell University in America, Kaushik Basu. Professor Basu, let me start by asking you for your assessment of the state of the economy today. In quarter one, we know that it's fallen by just a shade under 24%. And the World Bank estimates that over the course of this financial year, it will shrink by 9.6%. As a former chief economic advisor and as a former chief economist at the World Bank, what's your assessment of the Indian economy?
Karan, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this. About the Indian economy, the current predicament, I'm just extremely worried. I feel that where India has landed with its growth, as you just mentioned, minus 23.9%, we could not have imagined that a couple of years ago. And just to put it in perspective, because people immediately point out that, look, there has been a pandemic of staggering proportions. It's now clear that this pandemic is going to beat the previous two, the 68, 57 pandemic, and inch towards, it won't make it, to the Spanish flu. Given this magnitude, economies will be hit, and indeed economies have been hit. But India's minus 23.9%, if you put it in the global charts, it's true we don't get quarterly data on every country, but of the countries for which we have quarterly data, some 90 countries, there's only one country that has done worse. Peru has grown by minus 30.2%. So India is worse than European countries, worse than Asian countries, African countries in terms of growth. And this is to us extremely surprising because India was not there. India was among really the fastest growing economies till a few years ago. How did this happen is the question. Now, the coming year, the World Bank, close to 10%. IMF is now putting it down at, close to minus 10%. IMF is putting it down to minus 10.3%. India's growth in the year 20 to 21, the year inside which we are. My own estimate is, yes, that's about right. Probably we'll do a little bit worse. Usually international organizations forecast, I've worked with one for many years, they tend to err on the optimistic side. Growth, if you look at the data carefully, it tends to be most countries, the growth is a little worse than what they predict. And my back of the envelope calculation is that India's growth this current year is going to be minus 12%. And to put that in perspective, Karan, India's worst growth since independence was in 1979-80 when India grew by minus 5.2%. That was considered a disastrous year. And this year, if we grow by minus, say, 10%, I mean, everyone is in that ballpark of minus 10 to minus 12. I've seen Subramaniam Swamy say minus 15. I hope it won't go there. But minus 12 is my back of the envelope calculation. But if it is there, if it is at the IMF forecast, World Bank forecast, roughly minus 10 to minus 12, it is going to be one of the hardest years, actually the hardest year that India has faced since independence.
Now, in contrast to what you're saying, the government looks at GST revenue and export performance in August and September, PMI ratings, automobile and FMCG sales, agricultural production and electricity, and they say they can see green shoots on the economic horizon. I take it you disagree with the government.
Actually, on green shoots, I don't disagree. Let me clarify. I mean, if there were no green shoots after where India has reached, it is just pure disaster. So I do think that there are some indicators which are picking up, but you have to be very, very careful. Automobile sales, it's true that the pickup was quite substantial. The figure is 17% for Q2. But a lot of it is pent-up demand. I mean, automobiles was a sector that was completely massacred. Demand was piling up. At last, it is opening up a little bit. If you look at exports, it is true that India's exports have picked up, but, and this is telltale, imports have collapsed. And imports are an indicator of what is happening to ordinary consumers, ordinary people in the country. And the collapse of the imports is a signal that actually India is doing very badly and worse than other countries, because exports are a signal of other countries' demand. Imports are a signal of our demand. So, Karan, to put this in perspective, from the depth where the Indian economy had reached, there are indeed some green shoots, and we need lots of green shoots. We need sprouting to get back where we were. We are nowhere near that. But it is true that there are a few things happening over the last months where one hopes that we will gradually clamber out of this.
In which case, let's come back to your analysis of the economy. Which sector are you most concerned about? Is it MSMEs that represent 30% of GDP and 45% of manufacturing? Is it hotels, aviation, restaurant, and tourism, which ground to a halt under the lockdown and hasn't really restarted since then? Or is it construction, which is the second biggest employer in the country and shrank by 50% during the first quarter? Which are you most worried about? Or is it that you're worried about all of them?
I am worried about all of them, but in somewhat different ways. Let me explain this a little bit. The hotels, tourism, this sector, I'm worried, but this had to happen because of the nature of the pandemic. And this you will see across the world, that there was a sudden collapse in the demand for hotels and hospitality, and there is a pickup in demand for health and hospitals. So it is a bit of an alliteration, but that is actually exactly the way it happened. One sector was collapsing. There was a huge demand for another sector. India has not done that shift well enough, but this is something that the whole world has been grappling with. But construction, manufacturing, the small producers, the small MSME sector, that is extremely worrying. And that, as I'm saying, there are very few parallels in the world today the way India has performed. Yes, Peru, there are a few countries which are, and some European countries where the COVID has hit really badly, have done badly, but India is on its own. And all this sort of stands in such sharp contrast to where India was 5-6 years ago, when the global press was talking about India being among the fastest growing economies. It is like the Asian tigers. That story seems to be gone. And the manufacturing sector, which the government, I think, has rightly stressed, has to take on a lot of the burden of India's growth. That sector is floundering right now.
Now, Professor Basu, before we talk about the steps you believe the government needs to urgently take, I should point out to the audience that you also believe that the government's handling of the pandemic has actually added to the country's economic woes. Can you explain that point a little bit more fully?
Yeah. When the pandemic happened, as it happened, I was in India at that time. I was in during the lockdown. 24th of March, when it happened, early steps by the government. I was initially hopeful that India has acted quick. But there were two things which went wrong. One is very, very unfortunate, uncalled for. That is that it happened without any of the ancillary preparations that you would expect. So when such a sharp lockdown is done, the expectation is that the government has taken steps for the obvious fallouts that would take place from that. It was very, very soon clear that that planning had not been done or was not being executed, in which case people should have been called up. The fact that migrant workers were on the move soon after that was predictable unless there was a plan for them. And clear, it was evident to the whole world that India did not have a plan for that with that short lockdown. The other thing, where I actually don't blame India, but India was imitating Western countries which were locking down, and there was a bit of a struggle among emerging economies to outdo one another. I'll do a lockdown even better than you mechanically. What I hope I'll be able to come to that later. If you look at COVID numbers, one thing you have to understand, people will very often point to India's COVID mortality being much less than COVID mortality in United States or in UK. And indeed, that is true. Correct for population, India's nowhere near. India right now is 83 deaths per million population. United States is 600 and something. So 83 to 600. UK is 600 something. Spain, Italy, all there. But there is a mystery about COVID, and that in planning the lockdown, we did not take that into account. I'm not blaming for that. There are other things I do want to blame, the way it was done. See, there's a systematic difference. If you look at Asia and Africa, the COVID mortality is much lower across the board compared to Europe, Latin America, and North America. So much so that it's 10 times more. That to pick out my country and another country and say, look, I've done such great policies is not correct at all. There's something about this region that we don't understand. It could be past illnesses, past disease, protections that we've taken against them, the tropics, something is doing it across the board. Okay. Now, if you compare India with the other Asian countries, the crude mortality rate, India is one of the worst. And this was not the case in, say, early April. Now India's worse, almost double the number dying, population control. Of course, it's a large country, I'm controlling for that. Double the number dying compared to Afghanistan, compared to Pakistan, compared to Bangladesh, many more times compared to Sri Lanka, much more than China, Indonesia, Malaysia. India's COVID mortality is much higher in this zone. So something we did wrong, and that goes back to the lockdown. And here is the thing. The lockdown we described as the severest lockdown. But look at the pictures that we were seeing. 5% of the population was scattering all over, which is the exact opposite image of a lockdown. And if you study India's COVID mortality and COVID cases, they rose. It is going down now. It seems to have peaked. I hope so. I hope there won't be another one. But for about 5 months, they were rising, which was not happening in any other country. Pakistan, sharp, fell down. So I feel the lockdown, the way it was done without ancillary policies, actually was a double whammy. It froze the economy and it had the COVID spreading.
In an article that you wrote for Mint, where you made this point, you added another further one. You said all of this was known and visible to the rest of the world, as a result of which there was a shake-up in investor confidence and also a loss of trust in Indian institutions. And in that article, you said this was only the first concern as far as Western investors were concerned. A second concern, which also damaged the image of the Indian economy and dented the desire of Western investors to actually invest in India, is what you called the rise in divisive politics, heightened religious bigotry, and the attendant increase in insecurity. Can you explain that a little further? Because that is a point the Indian government tends neither to accept and in fact to discount. You're saying that the change in mood in the country, the attacks on Muslims and Dalits, has also put off Western investors just when, after this crisis with the lockdown, we need investment more than ever before.
Yes, I think so. I think so. That has done the damage. And that is the reason why the lockdown, with all its problems, lockdown was, people were experimenting. This is a new pandemic. We did not know what to do. You can pardon whatever has happened, even the policy mistakes that time. But if you look at India's growth over the last 5 years, it's clear that something else was going wrong. The lockdown was the sort of last hammering in of that point. From 2017, every year, growth is less than the previous year. It's 5 years of growth dropping. It comes to 4.2% before the pandemic hits. So India's nowhere in the top growers already before the pandemic. And what's going wrong? That's where I feel, Karan, and this is stepping outside economics. And I do believe that many economic policies that the government is doing are right. But an economy functions, and the economy is embedded in society, in politics. And when that is damaged, it damages the fabric of society. And I feel it's very puzzling. Why has India's growth been going down for 5 years, not just with the pandemic? I believe what is happening is things like trust. So there are economic variables. There are enough studies from Francis Fukuyama, you're probably familiar with that, to laboratory studies done in Israel and other countries showing that trust in groups is critically important for a society to do well. What I think has happened, and this here I am speculating because India's growth drop is a puzzle, and the pure economic policies which have contributed to this, some of them are economic policy mistakes, big mistakes, but it cannot explain. And I feel that trust and divisiveness is affecting, and there are indicators which is suggesting that, and that is to do with people need to feel included to invest in the economy. Investment is the crux of an economy's growth. If Kashmiris, take Kashmir, this is a politically sensitive topic. As an Indian, I want Kashmiris to be a part of India, but I want them to be a part of India because they want to be a part of India. That sense of inclusiveness, that we are a part of it. I want Indians across caste groups, across religions to feel a part of India. That is being damaged. And with that, I'm going to give you one piece of statistics for that damage. So allow me to say that investment, purely mechanical economist number, the fraction of the GDP that is being invested is a critically important variable for an economy's growth. Now, if you look at India's investment rate, which was reaching 35-36% in 2008-9, it was beginning to drop even when I was in government. So no getting away, it was dropping a little bit. It's plummeted. The investment, the GDP that is being invested is going down. People are not saving, not investing. And I think investment is so closely related to trust and a sense of inclusiveness in society that the politics is beginning to damage the economy.
Now, against this background, how do you assess the steps the government has taken? I'm referring both to the 20.9 lakh crore Atmanirbhar package announced in May, as well as the steps announced exactly a week ago by the finance minister, which she believes could add up to 1 lakh crore in demand. Do you believe these are wise and well thought out responses, or are they woefully inadequate for the challenge that lies ahead?
They are inadequate, but they are moves in the right direction. So in terms of these economic policies, I feel they are not adequate, but they are correct moves. You do need to allow your fiscal deficit to grow. And this is not something that you look, calculate, and do it 6 months down the road. You have to immediately do this injection into the economy to get buying power in people's hands, because the collapse in imports that I referred to earlier is a sign of people's buying power going. And when people's buying power going, that hurts farmers who want to sell to them. So it goes cascading through the economy. And it's the old Keynesian prescription, John Maynard Keynes, suggesting that you need to inject greater demand. Now, the details of what the government has done, I don't follow as closely. There are problems. For instance, people are pointing out that a lot of it is to do with credit, money, banking. You're easing things up, but you're not really putting cash in people's hands, though the recent move attempts to put some cash back in people's hands. So these are moves in correct directions, but they are not having the kind of effect that you would want.
You began by saying that these steps that the government has taken are in the right direction, but they're inadequate. Does that mean that there is an urgent need for further fiscal stimulus? And if the answer is yes, how much or of what order?
There is a need for a fiscal stimulus, further stimulus, and immediate. I'm not going to give you a number because I did this job once upon a time. I'm used to going through very, very carefully with numbers before I give numbers, but I think more is needed. And one more thing, this is the touchier topic about how you do it. Do you use the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, to inject liquidity into the system, which is basically creating money and allowing the government to spend, or just borrow and lend that? I believe that this is a time, and a rare time. I want to actually underline that because it's a risky policy, that a certain amount of monetization of the expenditure is called for. This is one of those crises where the Reserve Bank of India ought not just to lend money, but create money, which is often called a helicopter drop. that you're actually creating money and giving buying power in people's hands. The reason why you have to be very careful with that is this is a bag that government begins to dip into once they know that you can make your central bank print money and I will spend. And that's why economists around the world, central bankers around the world will caution governments, don't begin to do this. You will mess up the economy, and history is replete with examples where the government has stepped into the Reserve Bank's kitty and taken out money has spent. But this is one of those moments in India when you need to do a certain amount of that very carefully.
I can understand you're reluctant as a former chief economic advisor to give me a figure for the size of fiscal stimulus that's needed. Let me approach that differently. How high would you be happy for the fiscal deficit to go? I know you're saying that part of the stimulus should be monetized, but I take it part of it will still kick up the fiscal deficit. The government budgeted for roughly 3.5%. Most people say it's going to anyway come in because of extra borrowing at around 6 or 6.5%. How much higher would you be sanguine for it to go?
Karan, I won't give a number, but as far as I'm concerned, going to 7-8% fiscal deficit in a situation like this is fine. And the important thing to keep in mind is you must not hesitate now, but this cannot be a long run strategy. So I would go beyond what the government is going quite a bit right now, but put together a plan that really within a year, you begin to unwind and get the economy going. Because what Paul Krugman and others were saying in the United States, so I think everyone's beginning to get worried that this is a sharp downturn in the economy, but the economy is going to pick up. So what you do with it is go for a sharp fiscal deficit, deep fiscal deficit, but have correction plans. Literally from 9 months from now, you begin to unwind. So I would go for a deeper deficit than what the government is doing, but put together a plan. After all, in India, we've done that from the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2003, creating plans about the future. Do that a short run one now that the deficit is going to grow very high, but we are putting together a plan that 9 months down the road, we are beginning to unwind that. That's the direction in which you will go. The exact numbers, I would be cautious. I would need to look at many more things before I came with those numbers.
I'll just repeat the operative part of that answer because I think it's very important. You won't give an exact number. You need to look at a lot more to be able to give that. But, and this is the important bit, you believe there is need for a sharp and deep fiscal deficit along with a credible correction plan that is announced roughly at the same time so that people know that although the fiscal deficit could increase very substantially, there is a glide path to bring it fairly rapidly under control. Now, let me quote to you what not just the finance minister and the expenditure secretary have said, but what the chief economic advisor, one of your successors, has said, what the principal economic advisor has said. All four have said that they are open to the idea of a bigger, greater fiscal stimulus, but A, they won't be rushed into it, B, they want to wait for the right time, C, they won't suggest when that right time will come or what will determine the right time. So as a result, there seems to be no sense of assurance that this is going to happen or happen anytime soon. What do you make of that response to this critical issue?
Yeah, this is just a caution that you see in the bureaucracy. You don't like to commit to this. So I believe actually that is not right at all. Both because of what you actually do and the signal you give to the markets is so critical for the economy. If the market gets the signal that the government is coming in now and is going to stimulate demand, then producers will begin to produce. You don't produce after the demand comes, producers make projections. But if these signals don't go out from the government, that won't happen. I know one worry that the government has, which makes the government and the advisors hold back on this. The fear of inflation. The fear of inflation stalks us. I mean, I lived through India during a period when inflation was high. The fear of inflation, however, has much to do with, once again, expectations. If you go lax on your fiscal deficit and you go in for pump priming the economy without giving signals that you're going to fold back, inflation gets triggered off. But if you say that I'm injecting liquidity now, and as you summarized my statement better than I would be able to do, but here is a credible plan of how we are going to unwind and pull back on that excess liquidity over the next 2 years, starting 9 months from now. The signals that trigger inflation will not be there. So I don't think there's going to be a chance of inflation if the message is giving out right, and it'll get the economy going. And indeed, if the economy grows well, then that itself is going to have a dampening effect on prices because we are producing goods.
In which case, let me put this to you. If the sort of sizable fiscal stimulus that you believe is necessary, and as you said, it's necessary immediately, in other words, it's necessary now, but if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't get announced, what do you believe will be the state of the economy at the end of this financial year, roughly 5.5 months' time?
It's already very bad. As I was saying, that if at this stage we don't have green shoots after minus 23.9%, then the economy is in very, very deep trouble. So if we don't do that, then this year is going to turn out to be worse. The next year will also be a pickup, will be a slow pickup. In any case, I don't think India is going to do the sharp pickup that IMF is predicting. The IMF says it's a disastrous bad economy this year, but it's going to pick up after that. If you look at India's trend over the last 5 years, it's not very clear it's going to pick up immediately. But I do feel that in terms of fundamentals, the Indian economy has strengths. If we were not making the mistakes that we have made, the economy can get back to where it was, which was truly among the finest growing economies in the world. The signals were there. But if we continue to fumble, make mistakes at this stage, that's going to be dashed. And once it's dashed, it could be dashed for 10 years, 15 years. Who knows the India story?
I want to pick up on something you said there, Professor Basu, because I think it's very important. You said anyway, as things stand, you don't think the Indian economy is going to pick up as rapidly as the IMF is projecting is going to happen next year. But if the stimulus that you believe is necessary and immediately necessary doesn't happen, then that pickup will be even slower. And next year will be as bad, but not as bad, but next year will be another bad year.
Yes, I agree. And beneath that, it's not just the stimulus and the fiscal policy, but you need to make Indians feel a part of India, cutting across your identity so that you have trust in the institutions, so that you feel like investing in India. The investment is a very, very strange variable. We don't quite know when investment goes up, when it comes down, but the correlation between high investment and high growth from East Asia, from Taiwan, from Singapore, from China, you see it across the world. India had picked up on that, and may I point out that actually the pickup took place from around 2003. India's investment was rising. There was something happening in India, that there was a collective sense of India, people were investing. That has been going down, and there I feel, yes, partly it is to do with economic policy, fiscal policy, partly to do with politics. And I believe that the government ought to encourage this inclusiveness of India. Inclusiveness also includes, Karan, I should say, what you're doing. Questioning the government. One reason why you feel included is if you feel I can question the government. I am a part of this country, I want to question. When that voice is silenced, people do not feel a part of the country. India's strength, and it makes me feel very good when I go back to my time, one foreign journalist saying that there are very few emerging economies where you can have such open discussion. And I feel that gives you a sense of belonging to the country, and the government should be sensible. In its own interest, it should nurture that.
But you're now stressing on something that is actually a depressing factor, because it's not just that the government has to get the economic handling right to ensure that we return to the 7, 8, 9% levels of growth that we believe are essential. We're also saying that the politics of the country, the inclusiveness of the country, the fact that the people believe they are part of it, that there is trust, that there is a right to question, that dissent is acceptable, it's not considered sedition. That is an aspect that no one believes is going to be remedied or corrected very quickly. If anything, the signs are going the wrong way. So what you're saying is, even if the government gets the economic handling right, and at the moment on this question of stimulus, there are big question marks, but even if the economic handling right happens, the politics is heading in the wrong direction, or so many believe. That will be a drag on India's growth then until it is corrected, won't it?
Completely. My just only hope is there are people in government who will see this, It's true. I'm not seeing the green shoots of that. But I'm hoping that there are people who will whisper this, will talk about this, and say that this is a damage that is doing deeper damage to India, which you cannot correct through fiscal and monetary policy.
Now, we're coming to the end of this interview, Professor Basu, but I want to raise with you two reforms of which the government seems to be particularly proud. The first is to do with agriculture. It affects agricultural marketing, agricultural contract farming, as well as, of course, storage of produce. And the second is a whole package of labor reforms, of which perhaps the most important is permission for companies who employ up to 300 people to be able to hire and fire, with a further codicil that states have been given permission to then raise this limit to whatever level they want, whenever they want. So in fact, it could go from 300 to 10,000 if some state were to so decide. As a former chief economic advisor, how do you view these reforms, and will they make India a more inviting destination for investment, both domestic and international?
Karan, on both these, I feel they are moves in the right direction. They are moves in the right direction, but there has been huge concern expressed. Once again, this is a bit intertwined with the politics, is that the law is one thing, how you implement it on the ground is another. And I do worry that will it be done right, or will the space being created for greater freedom, will it get captured by a few big corporations? And if you have a few big corporations facing millions of farmers, the farmers will get a very bad deal. Let me explain a little bit in detail. The move on the agriculture front, I've throughout felt that the APMC laws, the fact that there are a few middlemen through which the farmers have to sell, was a constraining factor. So to see a move on that, whereby you are opening this up, I feel is a move in the correct direction. And here I disagree with many of my friends. I feel it's the move in the right direction. But I also do have worries that if in the end the mandis go so that the farmers don't have that fallback, and they have to, small farmers have to deal with a few big corporations that are buying from them, then their condition is going to get worsened. So I would like to see those safeguards in place. Let me come to labor laws. Labor laws, I have been a critic of the labor laws of India. And this particular law, which is up to 300 firms with up to 300 people can fire and hire. This was I think in 1982, the Industrial Disputes Act was amended to make it that anyone going above 100 workers will need permission. This is now being extended to 300. And by the way, this law is in India's concurrent list. So the states have always, in principle, had freedom to modify and change. So that's really not so novel. But here are again the dangers of, I feel India does need flexibility in the labor laws. But I would do that with only one thing in mind, the interest of the laborers. You bring in flexibility in the interest of the laborers, and you have to design this very well. I haven't looked at the details of this, but I know historical examples of mistakes. You know, very interestingly, the Industrial Disputes Act goes back to 1947, and it goes back to before 15th of August. So Pakistan and India inherited the same law when the countries became independent. Pakistan got rid of it and did badly by that. So it's just a reminder that you can mess it up and get rid of it. In 1956, for all the wrong reasons, they wanted to exploit workers mainly from East Pakistan. They got rid of the Industrial Disputes Act, the same act that in India has lived for a much longer time. Bangladesh is born in 1971 with a different set of laws because Pakistan had already got rid of it. And Bangladesh actually modified these laws quite well. So this law can be modified well or modified badly. India had not done it right. I'm glad to see the move. But everywhere there is a worry that unless this is done through open discourse, through criticism, these changes will be captured by few big firms. And then you'll have big firms facing, like when the first move was made in UP in May, it was a horrible way in which this law was being relaxed. You're just taking away bargaining power. The minimum wage is being removed from workers, from migrant workers. You're taking away their rights. The moves now are much better and in the right direction, but you have to be careful. Mistakes have happened in the past.
Now, the Indian government is very hopeful. They've actually said so formally that investment that is allegedly leaving China will come to India. So far, it's actually tended to go to Bangladesh and Vietnam. How confident are you that it will start looking to India as a third destination?
There again, I'm not confident. And this is once again the mixture of political economy. You just read the international media on India. The description of India has gone down, and no point being nationalistic and saying that it's a conspiracy of the media. There are some countries that have done that, every international news, every international statistics that comes out, you discount that and it becomes a strange inward-looking country. We don't want to go there. The ethos, the confidence in India that was there, that was really just blossoming and blooming some 5-6 years ago. That's gone down. I do believe that the demonetization took a knock on that because it was an unexpected policy in India, not a good policy at all. And after that, as I'm saying, it's once again to do with the politics and the lack of trust in the institutions. So there I'm not hopeful. And because in the beginning, the expectation was that, yes, capital is going to move out of China. The immediate reaction, if you see actually foreign capital left India in March this year earlier, it was a huge exodus, biggest amount. It's come back since then somewhat, but nowhere near what you would expect. I mean, India should be able to get a lot of the capital investment that was earlier in China looking for space coming into India. That's not happening at all. And that is once again not just economic policies. It is that the economy is not inspiring trust, not inspiring confidence. That is taking a toll on India. And once again, for that, you have to create the kind of space that India was moving towards. It was actually beginning to look like a mature economy, an open economy, inclusive economy, an economy where you could have open discourse. Open discourse contributes to confidence. Confidence contributes to trust. Trust to investment, investment to growth. These are chains which are getting disrupted.
In a nutshell, what you're saying is the change in the political mood of the country, the growth of intolerance, the absence of acceptance of dissent, the treatment of minorities, all of this has damaged India's image. The Western media now, to use your words, portrays India as a strange, inward-looking country, and this is putting off investors. They don't want to be part of a country that they've lost trust and confidence in. That's, in essence, what you're saying, alongside the economic problem.
Yes, I am saying that because I do believe India has fundamental strengths and correct these, and we are going to get back to the path. But yes, that is what I'm saying now.
Now, this is my last question. In an article that you wrote for Mint right at the end of August, you identified 3 sectors which you believe would be growth drivers in the post-pandemic world. They were information technology and outsourcing, health and pharmaceuticals, and higher education and research. And in that Mint article, you said, and I'm quoting you, India's economy is well positioned in all the 3 sectors. And therefore, you were initially optimistic about India. However, you add, over the last few months, those hopes have receded very quickly because time is our enemy. Why have those hopes receded? These are areas where India has traditional strengths.
I'm glad you're asking this question because it was building up towards this. Yes, if you look at those sectors, first of all, very, very quickly, India has huge strengths. As the digital world, I think the digital world is going to explode. The way I'm talking to you now, where I give my lectures all around the world, I've been giving lectures sitting in this, exactly in this spot. We are learning to use digital technology. India had a lead in that. India's takeoff from the early 1990s is to do with the fact that global business was coming to India, not the sort of business that comes on ships, but the business that comes on digital lines. And that, as that sector takes off because of the pandemic, I think India is very, very well positioned. Health, pharmaceuticals. India is recognized as a major player in the world. For generics, we are a very, very powerful country. So India is well positioned on that. Higher education and research, I feel India historically was very strong for an emerging economies. It was beginning to lose ground, but still our universities, our institutes, IITs, various universities, including JNU, were very, very powerful voices of India's intellectual space. So all the three sectors which I think are going to boom in the long run, India is well positioned. Get the economy right, get the political economy right, India will actually once again, I think, spring back to being in absolutely the forefront. But that hope is receding by the day, it is true. And it is receding, yes, some economic policy fumbling, but as I was discussing, mistakes take place in economic policy. And really, barring the demonetization, which was a big mistake, there have been big mistakes. The implementation of the GST was very poor, but it was a move in the right direction. So economic policies, it's a mixed bag. But the political economy, the more I'm looking at it, and that translates into a variable, the investment rate, which is something you calculate, that is going down steadily, each year a little less than the previous year. And that has to do with trust in the system. And so despite these great strengths, the more I'm watching, the more I'm losing hope, but I haven't given up hope altogether. I just keep expecting that it will strike our policymakers, that we have to make these reversals.
Okay.
We will make reversals.
In a nutshell, and I'm going to ask you to answer literally with a yes or no, what is holding back the hopes in these three sectors which you see as growth drivers in the post-pandemic world? Is the politics of the Modi government and what that politics has done to the mood of the country in India and to the image of the country abroad? Yes or no? Am I right?
Yes.
Professor Basu, you couldn't have been more succinct that is. Yes is the answer. Thank you very much for this interview. It was fascinating. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.